Please welcome to the stage Clinton Foundation board member and chairman of the Cornell University Board of Trustees, Robert Harrison.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. This is a very special privilege for me because I'm wearing the hats of two of my very favorite organizations and two of the most important organizations in my life. First of all, on behalf of Cornell, let me welcome you to Cornell Tech, which is the newest addition to our university. We are very, very proud of this campus because we were awarded 12 acres here on Roosevelt Island by Mayor Bloomberg by winning a worldwide competition against 27 other institutions of higher education in 2011. And the objective of this competition was to create the technology campus of the future here in New York City. The first three buildings are done. You're in the Bloomberg Center, which is the academic building. Across the path is the Tata Center, which is a co-location building where companies co-locate with our faculty and students to create new technologies and new companies. And then the tall one is the residential building. And this campus is designed to be carbon neutral. The campus this building has 1,400 solar panels on the roof, and just south of the building on the lawn, there are 80 geothermal wells which are helping us achieve this carbon neutral objective. We currently have over 400 students, all master's and PhD students here, and by the time the campus is completed, we will have about 2,000 students here, all working with the public sector, with private sector companies, and with NGOs to create new technologies and new companies and the leaders of the digital age. So first of all, let me encourage all of you to apply. This has been an incredibly positively transformative event for Cornell, and we hope and we believe that it will make an outsized impact on New York City and even the world. Which leads me to my other hat. As the former CEO of the Clinton Global Initiative, a role I began in 2007. That was the year that President Clinton conceived of convening the first CGI university meeting to bring the CGI commitment model to the next generation of leaders. All of us at the Clinton Foundation are incredibly proud of the fact that so far over 10,000 students have attended CGIU and made commitments to address some of the world's most pressing challenges. Thank you for being among that group of students and also for joining us for this very first alumni gathering. With that, it is my honor to introduce my former boss, the founder of the Clinton Foundation, the founder of the Clinton Global Initiative, and the 42nd President of the United States, William Jefferson Clinton.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Bob might have said that he is, in a way, now my boss because he agreed to serve on the board of the Clinton Foundation after he left his old post. This is, as you've heard many times, the first official gathering of the alumni. And I don't quite remember how we decided to do this, but I missed you. And I think that it's not always easy to keep going with any larger mission while real life intervenes and other things happen. And we began far too late to have an organized meeting of alumni of people who served in my presidential administration. And they're always so happy, and they share what they're doing together, and they work together, and they find new things to do together. So we were hoping that we could say thank you because CGIU wouldn't be what it is today without you, and encourage you to continue to participate with whatever networks you have from last time or make while you're here. As I'm sure you know, we're going to have our first international meeting of CGIU at the University of Edinburgh next year in Scotland. And I am really looking forward to it. It'll be easier for some and harder for others to get there, but once you get there, you will love it. I wanted to thank the staff for their work on this, and I want to thank our sponsors. I want to say a special word of thanks to IBM and their Call for Code initiative, because they are hosting hackathons all around the world, and college students are developing innovative solutions to improve natural disaster response and recovery. This is a very big deal. If we went to zero net carbon emissions tomorrow, we know that CO2 remains in the atmosphere for somewhere between 50 to 100 years, depending on the conditions extant in a particular place. So we're going to have more rough weather regardless. I spend a lot of my time in the Clinton Foundation working on the aftermath of disasters and trying to increase resilience and reduce damage in the next one. But I can't make them go away. We're doing a lot of work still in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, Dominica, and now, of course, in the Bahamas to try to do what we can to help. But the Call for Code is a very, very good thing. I want to thank the Peterson Foundation and its Up to Us program to help us build a sustainable economic and fiscal future for the next generation of Americans and for their support here. And I want to offer a little acknowledgement to Kevin Hsu, a longtime supporter of our work, a champion of young entrepreneurs, who has actually begun to mentor CGIU students. He is a walking Energizer bunny. He never gets tired, and he always inspires us. So I want to get into the program, but I'd like to say just one or two other things. The world we're living in has headlines that are dominated by everything we don't stand for. Right? Our differences are all that matters. Our national differences, our racial differences, our religious differences, our sexual identity, you name it, whatever it is, we need to really emphasize those differences. We believe our common humanity matters more and enables our interesting differences to become important, to make our lives more interesting, and to help us enrich people. We believe that diverse groups make better decisions than homogeneous groups or lone geniuses. We believe cooperation works better than conflict. We believe it's better to build people up than tear them down. Don't be fooled. Most people still believe that. If you're an American, you might be surprised to learn that when Congress was trying to kill everything that President Obama did and the partisan differences seemed wide, there were only 2 governors in America at the state level who had approval ratings of 70% or more. The Democratic governors of 2 of the reddest, most Republican states in the country, Kentucky and Arkansas. Why? Because they had managed the health program that had reduced the number of uninsured people in their state more than, by percentage terms, more than any other states in America. All the while the voters were thinking they had to somehow deny that President Obama had anything to do with his health program. In other words, everybody has lightness and dark inside. We want to be connected, and we're easy to spook. Today, in America, there are 2 governors who have approval ratings of 70% or more. Since the Democrats took back to Congress, they are the Republican governors of very Democratic states, Maryland and Massachusetts, because to govern they have to be inclusive. And they come across as normal, warm-hearted, interested people. So you can't get discouraged by the headlines unless they are completely reflected in the trend lines. In an interdependent world, youth, diversity, immigration, free thought, free speech, free movement, and cooperation work better than everything that dominates the headlines. And each in your own way, given the limits imposed on you where you live, just by doing what you do, help to make that world more just. The problem is when the headlines trump the trend lines, it has an impact on politics. And when you're dealing with things that have time limits, like responding to climate change in an adequate way, we can wind up shooting ourselves in the foot and compromising our future. So that's why we have to keep doing this. So we're about to get a very interesting panel underway. I do want to thank Bob Harrison for one more thing. He's probably the only guy besides me and one of our panelists wearing a tie today. And so I may be a Neanderthal, but I'm not alone. We all want to believe our species is still hanging around. Don't forget that. So before we go on, I want to introduce the next four of our alumni for a lightning round to give you an update on what they've been up to and what they intend to do.
Everyone, there we go. My name is Mahmoud Khedr from the City College of New York, CGIU class of 2018. I'm the co-founder and CEO of FloraMind, an organization my partners and I started in 2018 to address the global youth mental health crisis. After immigrating here from Egypt at age 11, I suffered for a decade through depression, anxiety, and even trying to end my life. And when I started doing research, I can tell you confidently that our young people across the world, they're dying. They're dying not only physically, they're dying mentally and emotionally because of unaddressed mental health challenges. We know that 50% of mental illness starts at age 14, and 85% of those who are suffering do not get treatment. They don't get help. In schools where young people spend most of their time, teachers are not trained to support them, the school infrastructure is not there to support mental health, and guidance counselors, usually the professionals young people go to for support, there's only one guidance counselor for every 500 students, on average across America. And FloraMind, we started to build resilient children, and we believe one of the best ways to empower young people is through mental health education. And so we design services and products to do this. Our programs designed with and for young people have focused on teaching middle and high school students across New York City skills such as meditation, mindfulness, stress management, deep breathing, gratitude journaling, and they also address social media, substance use, intersectionality, and relationships. By the end of this year, we'll have impacted 1,000 young people across the city and low-income schools, something we're very proud of. And our vision over the next 10 years is to reach 1 billion young people across the world. It's a very ambitious goal, empowering them to make sure that they flourish. Our immediate next product is to build an online training platform for educators, and we're excited because it'll help us scale across New York City, across the country, and across the world. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Sgarro from the University of Pennsylvania, CGIU class of 2016. I co-founded Asylum during my senior year at Penn to create the first ever digital resource platform for LGBTQ asylum seekers. It is still illegal to be gay in 70 countries. As a result, every year, tens of thousands of LGBTQ people will leave everything behind to seek asylum. At Asylum Connect, we use technology to connect persecuted LGBTQ people with verified safe services and support. LGBTQ asylum seekers use our free app as a digital one-stop shop to meet their needs in every aspect of their lives, from legal to housing to medical and mental health. Our app is now live in 25 US states, Canada, and Mexico. Since 2016, we've connected over 11,000 persecuted LGBTQ people with verified safe services here in this country, and our platform has been accessed in over 150 countries. We now hope to scale our platform and launch new mobile apps next week to ensure that every LGBTQ person finds safety.
Hello, my name is Sixto Cancel, and I'm the founder and CEO of Think of Us and CGIU CGIU, I know where I'm at. CGIU class of 2013. Think of Us as a systems change nonprofit that focuses on leveraging technology to upgrade the foster care system and its programs. Almost 900,000 young people between 14 and 26 have spent at least one day in the United States foster care system. The lack of stable homes, a support network, among many other issues, often result in undesired outcomes, such as a 24% high school graduation rate, 20% homelessness, and an average earned income of $12,000 per year. We have implemented a two-strategy approach. First, we help states and local foster care systems innovate by organizing hackathons to help them solve some of their most pressing issues. To date, we have had 7 hackathons that have resulted in over 50 outcomes, such as proof of concepts, pilots, policy updates, or new funding allocation, and have helped push regulations that have led to over $1 billion in funding to states to upgrade their technology systems. Our second strategy has been to build a platform to help foster youth create a personal advisory board that coaches them through tasks such as finding a place to live, applying for a job, or enrolling in school. Currently, we are conducting user research to move our prototype from concept to pilot in 3 different locations. When we started our commitment of action at CGIU, we committed to creating a website with videos on how we would get ready to be independent. At that time, I had no idea that the Think of Us team and our partners would have been able to have such a direct impact in upgrading the foster care system.
Hello, CGIU. My name is Agnes Igoye. I'm from Uganda. University of Minnesota, yes. CGIU class of 2011. I ran after human traffickers. At 14, I escaped human traffickers when the Lord's Resistance Army raided my village in search of virgins. I'm not alone. According to the International Labour Organization, an estimated 40.3 million people are in modern-day slavery. 1 in 4 are children. Thanks to my CGIU commitment to action, I founded the Dream Revival Center to rehabilitate survivors of human trafficking. I also founded the Hearts for Peace program, where female survivors build their own homes in 2 villages in northern Uganda, which is impacting over 50 households. I founded the End Child Trafficking campaign that has reached approximately 12,000 people, many of them children telling their own stories. I have trained over 3,000 law enforcement officers in 6 countries and delivered over 92,000 textbooks to educate vulnerable children in Uganda. Thank you. I have spoken at UK Houses of Parliament and to US members of Congress advocating for sustainable laws and policies to counter human trafficking. Upon graduating from Harvard Kennedy School with an MPA in 2017, I went on to contribute to teach a class on child protection at Harvard. Over 17,000 enrolled for the course. What started as an idea at CGIU 2011 has transformed to a global commitment, saving many lives from slavery. And I'm just getting started.
Now we're going to start the panel.
Please welcome our panelist, Indra Nooyi, former chairman and CEO, PepsiCo. Cheryl Dorsey, president, Echoing Green. Howard W. Buffett, professor and research scholar, Columbia University. And Zainab Salbi, humanitarian, journalist, and author.
So this is you in 10 or 20 years. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, our wonderful Chief Justice on the Supreme Court, I wish you were Chief Justice. Hillary and I were with her a couple of nights ago at Georgetown, where she had an annual lecture. So the annual lecture this year was just the three of us having a conversation. And she said something that I think sets the tone of what I hope will happen in this brief period. She said, fight for things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. And as I said, we're in the inclusion business. So in very different ways, in very complex circumstances, these four people have had to lead and include, have had to maintain what was good about what they believed in and spark change. So I want to start by giving them a chance to explain that. Indra Nooyi is my neighbor and friend. I live about 10 minutes from the PepsiCo headquarters. And once when I looked like a street beggar, I was touring their sculpture garden with my brother, and she took me in like a long-lost child, even though it was embarrassing in front of all the very properly dressed executives at PepsiCo. She began breaking barriers at an early age. She played guitar in an all-female rock band in India. She joined one of the first women's college cricket teams. She became one of 5 women out of 200,000 test takers selected for enrollment in the India Institute of Management. And she later went on to lead PepsiCo for 12 years. So let's begin with this. All these people are looking at you saying, wow. From my point of view, as someone who lived in England for 2 years and was given a book on cricket by the Prime Minister of England because I was so dense, I still don't understand it. So from my point of view, she's a certifiable genius because she not only understood, she played the game. But are leaders born or made? And if they're not born, what are they born with that allows them to be made?
That's a profound question. But first of all, thank you for having me on this panel, Mr. President. What I forgot to tell you is that I'm a member of the Bill Clinton fan club, so it's a privilege to be here. I don't know if leaders are born or made, because I don't know if I was born a leader or I was made because of circumstances to be a leader. I have no idea. But I will tell you that when we were kids growing up in India, and I grew up in a very conservative South Indian family, where the norm was you got married at 18, they found you somebody to get married to, a good family, and you had children, and you went on to live a good life as a good wife and a good mother. My mother was one of those people, brilliant, but she was married off when she was 18, lived a happy life with my father. But she applied on the 2 daughters, the brake and the accelerator. On the one hand, she'd say, I'm going to get you married off at 18. On the other hand, every night at dinner, she would sit down and say, while I'm having dinner, the 2 daughters, why don't you give me a speech on, if you were prime minister of the country, what would you do? If you were president of the country, what are you going to do? And at the end of dinner, I'm going to vote for one of you. And she did not say one day one daughter, one day the other daughter. She always listened to the speech and then decided who to vote for. Then she'd give us random pieces of paper and say, sign your name and say Chief Minister or Prime Minister or President. Here is a lady who, on the one hand, is just saying, I'm looking for a guy to get you married off at 18. On the other hand, she's saying, dream big. And then the men in our family basically said, the women are going to be treated on par with the men. Dream big, we're going to support you tooth and nail. And I'll tell you a little story so I don't monopolize the time. My sister first got into the business school in Ahmedabad in India. And girls never leave the home without getting married. And my mom said to her, you can't go there to the business school because you're not married. I'll get you married and then you can go. She said, no, I'm not getting married. I'm going to the business school. And my mother said, well, if you go to the business school without my permission, I'm going to fast till I die. And my grandfather and my father said, that's okay if she dies. We've already paid your tuition. So you see, 24 hours later, our kids, we're all terrified about this, but they just said, we're there, we'll take care of you, don't worry about it. Now, my mother's still alive. I just saw her and came here after seeing her. But I have to tell you, the men in our family allowed my mother to put a foot on the accelerator. And she herself, because cultural norms required her to put a foot on the brake, she did. But she also had a foot on the accelerator. And I always say, she lived life vicariously through the daughters. Without that environment and an environment of focus on education, I don't think I would have gotten to the leadership of PepsiCo. The only warning is, I tried this with my kids and they told me to get a life. That's the only cautionary statement. Safe harbor.
Thank you. Cheryl Dorsey, the president of Echoing Green, and I asked her to tell you how Echoing Green was named. In 1992, she got a fellowship from Echoing Green to launch the Family Van. It was a community-based mobile health unit in Boston to help solve the problems of infant mortality in minority communities. She then became the first fellow to lead this global organization. In the middle, she did a couple of years at the Labor Department when I was president, working for the Secretary of Labor, Alexis Herman, where she performed exceptionally well. So all these young people right now that are making commitments are social entrepreneurs. What happens when you go from being a social entrepreneur to leading a big organization, and how much was gaining new skills and how much was figuring out how to keep a big organization with an entrepreneurial mindset?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here on the stage with President Clinton. It was a really transformative year to spend in your administration, and I'm thrilled to be joined by my fellow panelists here. And I love talking about this topic because I've spent now close to 30 years working with young leaders like those assembled in this audience, and you give me such hope and just pure joy because I know we're going to be okay because I see you putting your shoulder to the wheel every single day. But I got into this work probably through a very similar trajectory, and I'm probably more like 30 years ahead of you all. And I think it's probably fairly simple. It's, have a passion, find a purpose, develop a plan, right? So for me, I, as a Black person in this country, was totally obsessed with this question, this original sin of our country, of slavery and the legacy of white supremacy. Sort of, how do we dispose of or marginalize a group of folks who look like me, who look like my parents, who look like my aunts and uncles, my grandmother, and led me down very interesting learning and experiential pathways to see if I could crack the code around it. And it was everything from, I remember when I was in high school watching the wonderful civil rights documentary, Eyes on the Prize. And there was a notorious segregationist in Birmingham, Alabama, Bull Connor. And sort of the old footage of him having his police force turn the hoses on these young civil rights activists. And sort of the mantra of, I don't mind because they don't matter, right? Sort of the searing narrative that entailed. I spent some time after college and before medical school working on a really interesting study that was a follow-up to Gunnar Myrdal's An American Dilemma. Sort of how do we look at this question of American exceptionalism alongside the problems of white supremacy and the marginalization of communities of color. Learned a lot from some of the top scholars around this country really thinking about these issues, and these were lessons that I then took to medical school and then to the Kennedy School of Government, where I got very interested in the issue of racial health disparities. It was shocking to me in the late 80s that a stone's throw away from some of the best medical facilities in the world, black babies at the time were dying at 3 times the rate of white babies. So it was shocking enough. And these were mothers who were bearing their children. And these were women who could be my sister, my cousin, my best friend. And it was haunting to me. And it really did ignite in me a purpose of how I was going to think about dismantling some of these structural inequities. Fortunately, that led me to Echoing Green, which took a bet on me, like you all are taking a bet on these young people at CGIU, and Echoing Green continues to do. And it really sort of launched me on this path to problem solving through the lens of social change. And I think now, as president of Echoing Green, you start to think at a macro level, what if we could unleash thousands of you, millions of you? Again, sort of throwing a rock against the status quo until it breaks, until it cracks. Imagine what we could unleash together. And I'm still doing it all these years later because I see the progress that we're making in many ways because we're backing young talent like this. So it is the trajectory of change, the arc of change that is rooted in justice as much as it is in innovation and disruption.
Zainab Salbi is one of the most interesting people I've ever met. She was born in Iraq in turbulent times. She lived there until she was a teenager. She came out and became an author, a journalist. Her most recent book's called Freedom is an Inside Job. I'm going to pump her book because I read it and I highly recommend it to all of you, especially when you get battle fatigue, because other things happen. Life happens to you. So she founded Women for Women International, which helps to support women survivors of war. And a lot of them survive physically, but not so well otherwise because of all that happens. So can you explain to us how your personal experiences both inspired and informed the work you do, and how you've dealt with the unfolding of your own life and kept your mission alive?
Well, President Clinton, first of all, I join Indra in being one of your fan clubs. I can't give myself president because I'm sure there are lots of people who want to be the cheerleaders of that, but I definitely am a passionate member. And I tell you why. And it's connected to the question. It's because you have always been generous. You have been generous, you know, when I was 25 years old, a kid, a refugee, or not legal refugee, but a recent immigrant in America, legal immigrant, I mean, back in 1995, and you gave me an award at the White House for my work in Bosnia, and I was a 25-year-old kid. And 25 years later, a few months ago, you call me and tell me that you read the book and that my latest book, and then that you enjoyed it. And that is both extreme acts of generosity, that you would take the time to call and that you would take the time to meet a 25-year-old immigrants from Iraq back then. So I thank you constantly, and that's part of the reasons, in my opinion, and to answer sort of the other questions, is how one become a leader. We become because we are supported and endorsed and given opportunities, partially. And partially we have to step into the position ourselves and make the choices. But partially it's because there is support of individuals like you, and for that I'm extremely grateful. But back to your question, you know, of course, I think everything we do is partially working our own stories. I grew up in a country where there was fear. I grew up in the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein, and we were always afraid to speak the truth or to speak or to express our opinion. You know, I've been in this country for almost 30 years, and I'm still excited every time I tell my opinion, and I'm not in prison or anything like that. I was like, wow, this is such a beautiful freedom one has in this country. And so for me is understanding both sides, understanding what it means, what does life means when you actually can't act because you're afraid that you may be in prison or your parents get killed or whatever, and then coming to this country and understanding the beautiful values of this country, which gives you the opportunities to act and to speak and to do something. And so because I looked at these values from a fresh perspective, you know, it's like I believe that when we see something wrong, any kind of injustice, if we avoid doing something about it or hearing it, then we legitimize it. And mostly we allow for the corruption of our own values. Because we all want to claim we are good, but what good is that if we see something wrong and we don't act on it? So for me, coming to this country is, and I still, 30 years later, I've lived more in this country than in Iraq. I can't tell you how much I cherish and respect and will fight for the rest of my life for the values of this country, which at the moment sometimes is at jeopardy, is the values of freedom, the values of equality and justice. And because I was given that chance, I had to step up and do something when I saw women in countries that I've never heard of, Bosnia at the time, I never even knew where Bosnia was, or then later Congo or Rwanda. I've never known anything about these countries, but there were injustices there. And I knew what it means, and I couldn't act before, but I could act now, so I had to take advantage of this opportunity that was given to me. And it made me believe, my journey made me believe that it is possible that we make a difference in this world. If I, a 23 years old woman, when I started Women for Women International, with no money, no job experience, no family with me, could actually lead to an organization that raised nearly $500,000 and $120 million, connected 500,000 American women with 500,000 women survivors of wars, and I started from zero, then anybody can do that. Any one of you or any person can do that. And it takes perseverance, it takes awareness, patience, it takes a lot of falling apart, and then you stand up and dust yourself and then keep on going. It takes a lot of things, but all of them are manifestation of my inner story as well.
To put it modestly, Howard Buffett had a lot of other choices he could have made with his life. And yet, he has devoted an enormous amount of effort to economic development and empowerment of poor people and growing up in adverse circumstances in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and all over the world. He may want to talk about some of the other places that he's worked. So yes, he's a professor at Columbia, but so is my daughter. You always said your grandfather inspired you to do what you're doing. Explain that. How and why? And why do you keep doing this?
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I appreciate it. And just to begin, I think I should also say that I'm completely inspired by everyone else who's on this panel. I feel incredibly humble sitting up here with everyone who's here. But I've also had the wonderful opportunity, as you were saying, President Clinton, to be surrounded by people in my own life who have accomplished so much, so many remarkable things. My grandfather specifically is truly a remarkable person. And it's not necessarily because of his investing, although that's turned out quite well, but it's...
We have some people here from overseas. Tell them who your grandfather is.
Oh, okay. Warren Buffett. Yeah, so I just refer to him as Grandpa. So he's really this tremendous individual, and in addition to his investing and everything he's done in that regard, he's also someone who has more integrity and more honesty than almost anyone else I have ever met. He's the kind of person that he might make a mistake, and he'll tell you he makes them all the time, and then he'll tell you why he made that mistake, and he'll tell you that he was, maybe a little forthright in telling you that he should have thought better before making a mistake, and then he'll tell you that what he learned from it. I mean, he'll go through a whole series of explanations as to how he could be a better person himself, and yet he's essentially the top of his game when it comes to the field that he's in. But he's also incredibly dedicated to his family, which is something that I think continues to matter deeply to me, and is an example that he sets. We'll call the office or send him an email, and he'll respond within an hour or two, literally. And if you think about the demands on his time, you think about, he's running a company that itself is responsible for, many thousands of employees and other subsidiaries, and yet he goes out of his way to illustrate the priority that his family is to him, despite everything he has going on. And to me, that sends a really strong signal. Now, all that said, I will share probably the most salient moment in my life that is in regards to where my grandfather really inspired a lot of the work that I do. And it was when he announced he would be leaving almost all of his wealth to philanthropy. I don't know if anyone on the panel remembers that. It was June 26th of 2006. So not too long ago, but maybe before some of you folks would have been paying attention to that. I don't know. And that day, that moment was one of the proudest moments of my life. And I think just step back for a moment and consider, here's someone, my grandfather, who had really reached the pinnacle of success in a capitalistic society. And at one point had grown the largest fortune in the world. And here he was wanting to turn it into one of society's greatest gifts. He wanted to donate it to the betterment of humankind and to give it all to philanthropy. And in doing that, he really sent a message that he wasn't going to measure his success anymore by how much money he made, but by how much he could give away. And I think that, yes, this symbolism of that is quite remarkable, right? Because he's really kind of turning that definition of success on its head. And for me, what it meant was I could sit back and I could look somewhat objectively, despite the fact that he was my grandfather. And at times when I would feel maybe discouraged about what I was or wasn't accomplishing in life, or where my career was at one point, I could remind myself that he truly symbolized what one single individual can accomplish in a lifetime. And to be able to build what he built and then to be giving it all away to improve humanity just continues to motivate me in the work that I do. Now, thankfully, I had also the great benefit of spending a lot of time observing the way that he operates. He's been an inspiration for the research that I've done at Columbia, and he's been an inspiration for a lot of the other jobs I've taken throughout life in public service as well. So he though, really has been a North Star, so to speak, for the work that I do. So thank you for asking.
You should also know that he said for his children he was going to give them enough money so they could do whatever they want, but not so much money they could do nothing. And so most of it has to be spent on charity, right?
Yeah, pretty much all of it. Yeah, essentially. So that's in the foundation work that we've been doing.
All his children have their charitable work too. What's the toughest place you ever worked, and what, if anything, did you learn from your grandfather that helped you to do what you were doing?
Okay, well, that's a wonderful question. I've actually never been asked that. Well, off the top of my head, I would say that the work that I did in Afghanistan was probably some of the most challenging work. So I had a wonderful opportunity to work in the Defense Department, but as a civilian. And this was in 2012, 2013. I couldn't have been more excited about the work. I remember telling my wife when I started, she broke down crying, that I was going to be taking this job and going overseas. But thankfully, we stuck through it. And what really struck me about the people that I was working with in Afghanistan is that I had had this really remarkable childhood growing up, where I had been able to travel to maybe 60 or 70 different countries before the age of 25 through the work of the philanthropy that our family was doing. And I can tell you a lot of stories from that work in particular, but the folks that I met in Afghanistan, the people that I met out in rural communities, and the spirit that they had, the level of entrepreneurial drive that was coming through so many of the individuals that we spent time with and we worked with, really motivated me to want to invest a lot of my time and my energy back into that country. And so I had this opportunity to work at the Defense Department to go do rural economic development, particularly focused in Western Afghanistan in a tough province called Herat Province. And one of probably the most salient things that my grandfather does so extremely well that stuck with me in that work is my grandfather's remarkable in the way that he engages shareholders of Berkshire Hathaway and as true kind of owner partners of the company. That's the term that's used in the Berkshire owner manual, owner partners. And he communicates with shareholders as though they're family members. He hosts the big annual gathering in Omaha every year where everybody comes together. And he has this one-on-one conversation with them. He does just this unbelievable job of creating a community out of the people that he's ultimately responsible to. And for me, I was able to take some of those lessons, in addition to a whole lot more that I talk about in my research, and apply that directly into the work we were doing in Afghanistan. So being able to go out and spend hands-on time in local communities on literally a daily basis, and having some advantages in our team that a lot of other folks didn't. We weren't stuck inside the embassy, so we really had the benefit of being able to go out and see every community we were working with 2-3 times a day, which is really unheard of a lot of development agencies that are there. And so really understanding the importance of open communication and really developing a direct relationship with the people who you're a steward, essentially, of the resources that are trying to make their lives better. That was one of the most significant, I think, lessons that I had that I tried to bring into my work there.
I want to drill down a little bit here. I noticed that a number of you were nodding your head when I mentioned something about the hitting a stone wall, suffering burnout, wondering what you do, how long you can keep going. So I want to give each of the panelists again a chance to talk about this. We all keep score. Some of us do it consciously, some of us do it unconsciously. I think one of the serious mental health challenges, even people who seem to have had very stable backgrounds but are ambitious face, is the unconscious keeping of scores, which eats at your insides all the time. So tell us how you define success in your job and how you kept score. Indra, we'll start again with her. She ran a Fortune 500 company. She had to make money. The shareholders had to be happy. But she went out on a limb. The first time we really worked together was after I partnered with the American Heart Association on something called the Alliance for a Healthier Generation, because we had a generation of children that were eating themselves straight into diabetes with all of its consequences and an early grave. So they decided to take steps, she and the other people in her industry, that resulted in a 90% reduction in calories and total drinks shipped to our schools. Nobody thought that would happen by voluntary. I mean, all the people that were for big soft drink taxes and everything looked at me like I was a naive fool when I said, I believe these people will do this. And they said, how can you say that? I said, well, first of all, if diabetes continues, type 1 diabetes, the kind you get from living, or type 2 diabetes, excuse me, the kind you get from living, I said, if it continues to grow like it is, they're not going to have nearly as many customers, because you're going to have all these people who have to worry about the legs that just got amputated by the time they're in their 30s. I mean, but secondly, I think people fundamentally want to be proud of what they do and want to believe it's a good and decent endeavor, whatever it happens to be. So how did you keep score? How did you define success? And once you defined it, how did you keep score?
I think there are different things that you have to keep score on. The stock market forces you to keep score of the financials, and that you do every quarter. You have no way to get out of that loop of reporting financials every quarter. I think where we really leaned in, when we decided to transform the portfolio exactly along the lines that President Clinton was just talking about, there are two things that we could have looked at and we did look at. The first was outputs. We could look and see how many products we were lowering the calories on, reducing fat, sugar, and salt, how much advertising money we were putting behind the lower calorie products. And that resulted in a certain set of outputs. Products got put on the shelf. But that does not measure outcomes, meaning, did society really get healthy because of what we were doing? So from our perspective, outputs are what we could control. Outcomes are what would result if we worked with other people in a consortium. So what President Clinton talked about, which is the Alliance for a Healthier Generation, was in schools. But in addition, I went in front of the retailers and other manufacturers and made a speech saying, if we could all get together and reduce the caloric output that we put into the grocery stores, we could actually create a healthier America. And we committed to take out 1.5 trillion calories from the diet in 4 years. And we took out 4 trillion calories in 3 years. And if you see the curve on obesity in the country, again, these are long-term results, so we won't see the real report card for a few more years, but the outcome was obesity levels started to plateau as opposed to rise, which is a major outcome from all the outputs that the companies were giving. The only point I'd make to all of you is the kinds of projects you're doing, a lot of outputs can happen quickly, but the outcomes require cooperation, require working in consortium and with other partners, and requires you to measure the progress of the project over a long time. And I hope our industry, I'm not in it anymore, but I hope our industry continues to measure the outcomes, because ultimately, you don't care whether PepsiCo sold more zero-calorie products. We are worried about what's the outcome on the society. Are they getting healthier? Are they living longer? Because until a few years ago, our children were going to live fewer years than their parents. That's a terrible, terrible statistic. So the whole idea is to reverse the curve. So I think success for me was the outcomes were getting better, not just the outputs that we were focused on as a company.
This is really important because we had I want to brag on her a little bit here, because we had great success in getting her competitors to follow us on the soft drinks, not so much on the snacks, partly because there were more players in the field, but she did that anyway. She more or less did that on his own. It's harder in a market economy to take a flying leap and believe if you don't keep people on a constant sugar high, either in snacks or politics, that people won't support you. That's good. So, Cheryl, how did you define success and how do you keep score?
Interesting question, and I apologize, President Clinton, because I didn't answer your initial question, where did the name of Echoing Green come from? So I'll loop back. So Echoing Green was founded almost 35 years ago by the senior leadership of a well-established private equity firm called General Atlantic. And this firm really has been a pioneer in the field of social innovation. And we've now become the world's leading angel investor in emerging social entrepreneurs. But one of the founders of both General Atlantic and Echoing Green was also an artist. And loved the poetry and art of William Blake. And so the name of Echoing Green is taken from a William Blake poem called On the Echoing Green that talks about the role of youth in society. So a very high-minded story where the name of Echoing Green came from. But in terms of sort of the hard-nosed stats of how do we talk about success, we think about it in a couple of levels. So at the individual level, we look very much like a best-in-class incubator or accelerator. So folks who come into the fellowship program within 1 year, they've raised 10x our initial investment, hired 10x the number of FTEs, and collectively the portfolio within a year is serving 2 million constituents around the world. So the acceleration effect is huge. I think at a more meta level, as I talked about, I believe deeply in the power of young people to be transformative forces for change in the world. So when you look at the young people who are out in the world going through pipelines like Echoing Green is enormous. You know, every year about a third of the young people in the list of Forbes under 30 come out of our pipeline. You know, a number of MacArthur Genius Awards have come out of our pipeline, Skoll awardees and the like. But I think at a meta level, what I find most important about Echoing Green is the permission it has given all of you to find your bliss and your passion and put your shoulder to the wheel to social change. When I got started 30 years ago and got this thing called Echoing Green, my family thought I was crazy. I was the first person in my family to go to medical school. I had a whole host of loans. And to tell my parents that I wasn't going into clinical medicine was astounding to them. I had a beloved aunt who called me the village idiot one year at Christmas dinner. They could not believe it. But the fact that your generation, the cachet, the pedigree, that we see when we look at you and what you've chosen to do with your career, in some way, that's the dial that has really been moved.
Zainab, How do you define success, and how do you keep score?
Well, I had to learn it, the tough way, I think, because, as a young person starting an organization, you are looking at what the world is defining success. And it's not the financial market, but it is the measurements and the metrics and the data and all of these things. And so that's what drives you. And every time I was driven by these externalities of values, I hit a wall. I mean, and I can tell you there are a few walls that I hit in my life, but one of them I actually was just start crying. I just was exhausted. It's and my husband then called the ambulance because he didn't know what to do with me, and he's like, they called and they was like, is he abusing you? I was like, no, I love him so much. And they said, are you doing well? I was like, yeah, it's cool. I just got a straight A, and this is in my 20s. And it's like, is your work? I was like, I just got an award, and it's all good. Then what's wrong? And I was exhausted. And that story keeps on going because we are in a driven society, accomplish. And every time I go at it that way with a warrior kind of mission, you do accomplish. I mean, you do. I'm very proud of my accomplishments, but you lose part of yourself in your values, your community, family, self-care, all of these things. So now my measurements of success has changed, to be honest. And it started from an advice that Oprah gave me, because then you become afraid of leadership, because if leadership means I have to measure to all these metrics and I forget myself, then I don't want to be a leader, And then she gave me an advice. She said, then lead in your own values. What are your values? And lead that way. Don't lead from what the external values are. And when I switch the matrix to base it on my own values, success now, yes, my accomplishments, but honestly, have I exercised today or not? Right. Did I eat healthy or not? Did the work that I have done have soul? Because, to quote Jack Ma, computers now are doing, AI is doing all kinds of things. What we need is, as humanity, is pay attention to the art and the soulfulness of things. So is it feeding my soul or not? So it became a much more 360 degrees of measurements that is of personal, of community, and indeed of impact oriented rather than just impact. And one more thing, sorry, because ultimately, to summarize that, I learned that whatever cause we are working on, and I'm in the business of making social change, right? But it doesn't matter. It does, even if you're raising your own, the cause does not require you to self-sacrifice. And that's very important for you as you're starting your own careers to know. You do not need to self-sacrifice yourself for whatever you're working on. It is possible to actually have it, both yourself and whatever you're accomplishing, be accomplished.
I think you have to get to the place in this world where whatever you're giving to other people is the ultimate selfishness, because it's what makes you happy. But you still have to keep something back. You have to, something for you. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry the other day. I have a wonderful chief of staff, Tina Flournoy, who's been very active in Democratic politics, worked for big companies, done things for years. She's a fascinating woman from Georgia. She looked at me, she was just howling at some story I tell her, and she said, "Your life was so much more interesting before you got in politics." And I said, "Oh, don't say that." I found my work interesting, so it was worth giving up some of the, wandering around I did looking at things before. But it was something we all deal with, and you will deal with it too. And it'll seem different, and you'll weigh it differently as you go through life. So Howard, you might think, would have the easiest run. But I think in some ways he had a unique set of challenges. So how do you personally define success, and how do you keep score?
Well, first of all, I want to pause and just recognize how important the question is. And for everyone who's in here today, if you haven't asked yourself this very question, then you need to do it as soon as you get home. it will drive so much of not only what you're doing and how you do it, but most importantly, why you're doing what you do. And it's very easy, I think, depending on what age you are and where you are in your career, to not have necessarily taken the discipline to sit down and quite literally start writing this out. And don't hesitate to do it, because you can always erase or throw a piece of paper out and revise it a month later or a year later. It doesn't matter. Just the exercise of doing it is so critically important. Now, I'll answer the question in two ways. One is kind of on the actual individual metrics themselves, and then two is a bit on the more broader picture that we've got. Now, on the individual metrics, it's quite easy. So as a professor, I take a lot of pride in how well my students do. And so when I think about how many of my students get A's, that's a really good measure of success. Now, one challenge is, as the professor, it's quite easy to manipulate that output. So you also want to make sure whatever measures you have keep you honest. So that's really important. Another one that was kind of a material measure was that our research got published last year as a book called Social Value Investing. And one of our measures of success there was not on the number of book sales. This was an academic book, but it was on the number of classrooms that we were getting the book into, and explicitly the number of students, the number of future leaders that we were having exposed to the ideas and the frameworks that we were writing about. So that was critically important too. But I think stepping back a little more broadly, when I was in graduate school at Columbia, I kind of came over this realization of what life success meant to me. And to be completely honest, after I realized it, I was depressed for a little while. It kind of speaks to a little of the challenges Zainab was saying. But I realized success for me was when there was no needless suffering in the world. But that's an almost impossible thing for any one individual, obviously, to accomplish, right? And so that really, really drives how important it is to remain inspired in the work that you're doing, because one person can't necessarily do that for everybody, but you can do it when you join hands with all sorts of other people and when you work collaboratively. So we talk about that in the research, but I think probably the most important piece that came out of that realization for me was that until society really starts to redefine what it means by success at large, we won't see this needless suffering come to an end. And so think about what are today's kind of traditional measures of success for society: wealth, power, and fame. But of those three things, what really serves the needs of your community? What allows you to really improve the state of the world through that? You might be able to channel certain components of wealth, as my grandfather did, certain elements of power, as President Clinton did when he was in office. But in reality, if everyone is kind of driving towards those externalities, as Zainab said, then we've got some challenges. And part of what I'm starting to see creep up is a lot of what CGIU represents at the core of its heart. This idea that community impact and the improvement of the people's lives around us is becoming a new definition of success. And I think we're also seeing that permeate in all different parts of our economic system. So first of all, for most of the folks who are in this room, you're in the 25 to 35 age range, more or less. So of us, I just turned 36, we will dramatically make our purchasing decisions based on how much a company's product or service is associated with a social cause. So 94% of us will choose products or services that associate with a social cause. So now if all of a sudden your competitors aren't doing that and you're looking at what's on the shelf, you're going to be in big trouble if you aren't starting to catch up to this phase. 80% of us in this room will choose to do a project that improves our community before we'll do something to earn maybe a little extra professional recognition, something that may push us a little bit closer to a promotion. We care more about improving our community. And in 2013, so this has been now around for 6+ years, Deloitte did their first millennial study, and they found that in our age group, it was the first time we were defining the primary purpose of business, not as creating a profit, but as improving society. So think about how big of a shift that is, right? In the institutional markets, 1 out of 4 of every invested dollar under professional management is invested with a social bent to it in some way or another. Larry Fink at BlackRock is issuing letters on an annual basis talking about how his company may not invest in other companies if they don't articulate what their purpose is. They may literally, and I quote, lose their license to operate in society if they cannot articulate their purpose. If you haven't heard about the Business Roundtable letter that came out recently, 180 kind of leading CEOs articulating the new role of business in society. Think about all of the changes that are happening across the board. And so for me, the more and more I see that happening, the greater of a tide that we're starting to see shift across these elements, that to me is success. It's something I can only in a very minute way contribute to, but it's something that I'm going to continue pushing for as hard as I can, because I don't think we can make society at large a fair and just place unless we have gone through that redefining of what it means to succeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Here's the last thing I want to ask, because I think it either already has or will affect all of the alumni. I always have to remind, when I talk to young people and they're getting discouraged, that there are no permanent victories or defeats in human affairs. We've solved polio and somebody gets sick with something else. There's always something. That's what makes life interesting if you think about it in the right way. So every one of you, Cheryl already told us her story, how she didn't be a doctor. But every one of you has undergone some change and you aren't doing what you used to do. So, one, how do you deal with a dramatic change in your work life and what impact it has on your inner life and your personal relationships? Two, how do you manage the feeling that, oh, I should have been there because this or that would have happened if I hadn't quit this? People ask me that all the time. And so I think about this a lot. But this is really important because I think my goal, my selfish goal in all of this is that you could be sitting in these chairs 25 years from now, most of you doing something slightly different than you're doing now, but just as enthusiastic, just as committed, just as full of belief in human potential as you are today. And if you're going to do that, you have to figure out, how am I going to manage when I can't do what I used to do anymore? How am I going to manage my reflections on what the people who are there now are doing? And how am I going to keep looking forward? It's all a big challenge. And every one of these people has faced this in some way or another. So let's start with you. I know Indra's family was happy when she wasn't working 90 hours a week or whatever the heck she did at Pepsi, but you can only make them happy so long, then you still got to get up and be you. And you are a doer. So how did you do this? How are you doing it?
You know, I tell you, if you want to have a career and move ahead, you are going to have to make trade-offs. And you are going to feel guilty. You're going to have regrets. That's just part of life. The challenge is not to let those regrets and guilt overtake you completely. Now, let me give you the flip side. I've talked to a lot of mothers who didn't work, who had college degrees but chose not to work, but stay at home and have kids. They too have regrets that they didn't go work, they don't have economic security, they don't have financial security. They have different kind of regrets. So I think regrets and guilt are part of life. The real question is, how do you keep it all in balance and say to yourself, hey, this is not a killer. I can manage through it. There isn't a day that I don't wish that I'd been around when my kids were small. But there are days that I didn't go to work and stayed with them that I wish I'd been at work that day because I didn't get something done. So that's life, you know. My kids remind me when I wasn't there, especially if you have girls, they know how to. So I've got a lot of those. But I think at the end of the day, you've got to park your guilt to the side at some point. It took me many, many years to do that. I parked my guilt to the side, and I realized that I was a pretty good mom relative to a lot of the other mothers who are stay-at-home moms too. Because, you know, in school, my kids went to Catholic school, and they'd have class coffees on a Wednesday morning. And I couldn't go to the class coffees because I had to go to work. And every time I came home, my daughter would say, rattle off all the mothers that were there and how I wasn't there. So I'd call the school and get a list of moms who were not there. And when she came home and told me all about the mothers that were there, I said, let me tell you who was not there. So I had to do that for my survival because I had to prove to her that I was not the only bad mother. Some of us had to work, you know? We just had to. So I'm not suggesting that as a way to Ignore your kids. I'm just saying that's your coping mechanism. So there were so many coping mechanisms. I mean, I get a call, Mom, your turn to bring the chocolate chip cookies in. I said, you didn't tell me. Yes, it was on the list that you had at the beginning of the term. I didn't look at that list. So it's now 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, the cookies are due. I call the cafeteria. Chocolate chip cookies make it look like I made them. I don't care what it costs. Put it in an aluminum foil. It cannot look perfectly round. Just make it look a little irregular. Take it to school. My daughter thinks I'm fabulous. So at every point in time, I had to co-opt an ecosystem. When Secretary Clinton wrote about it takes a village, oh boy, I had a big village around me. Everybody helped. And I developed coping mechanisms. My secretaries, my receptionist, people in my office, my boss when I was not CEO. Everybody helped. Of course, my husband did too, but at work. I had to balance work and family all the time. I'm not sure I was perfect at it, but I wasn't bad at it. I'm still married. 2 kids turned out okay, so I think it's really...
By the way, that's another reason you should keep score, because I assure you your children do. Cheryl?
This is a tough one. So I'm trying to sort of think back to my journey. And what would I tell you if I was sitting in the audience, 30 years ago? I would probably say I feel like each of you are here because you have the privilege to be excellent, right? You've got this suite of skills, gifts, talents, and that you're choosing to dedicate to making the world a better place. I think that's extraordinary. I think it's dazzling. But again, maybe it goes back to your question, President Clinton, how do you define success? And I think that the way it is set up for you all, the framework is wrong, right? So my mom was a guidance counselor, and I sort of went to public schools in Baltimore, Maryland, and was sort of taught that success looked like being a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer, or business executive. And I realized that's the wrong framework, right? So again, I think it's the alignment of, again, your unique skills and gifts and passions that allow you to go out and make an impact on the world, a lasting impact. And figuring that out is incredibly difficult. I think it's taken me most of my adult life to figure it out, right? But it's not a title. It's not being a doctor. It's not being the CEO of an organization. It's that alignment. So I'll use the example. So growing up in Baltimore, the neighborhood in which I grew up, Pikesville, Maryland, was one of the first to allow black families to move in. It was a predominantly Jewish community that didn't have some of the restrictive covenants that other neighborhoods did. So I had the wonderfully diverse experiences across my childhood of celebrating Christmas and Hanukkah, right? I came of age in the early days of rap and hip hop. So I played violin in my high school orchestra, listened to a lot of Bach and Vivaldi, but was much more interested in Sugar Hill Gang, Run DMC, getting home to listen to the newest of hip hop and rap. And then by the time I got to medical school, was sort of spending my afternoons in the hallowed halls of one of the best institutions in the world. But every afternoon would leave sort of the gates of Harvard, cross the railroad tracks into neighborhoods of inner city Boston, Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan, and began to dawn on me that actually what I was a cultural translator, right? I was diffusing through situations very easily, right? As comfortable on Wall Street as I am on Main Street, right? Sort of going across cultures, trying to be a bridge between both. And I realized that's what I do for a living. Like, all of those experiences have led me to where I am today. And I wish I had been more reflective and thoughtful at your age, because I think I would have figured this out many years earlier if I had used this village that you all have here now. This is your kitchen cabinet. So each of you see each other's gifts and skills and talents in ways that each of you probably don't alone. So you need to be talking to one another, interrogating one another to figure out what that suite and constellation of gifts and skills and talents are, and take them and go out and change the world. And I know you can do it, but again, that journey is really hard. You got to go deep. You got to be vulnerable. You've got to get out of the current frameworks that we try to slot each of you into. But if you do it, It is powerful, and I deeply believe that is your path to impact.
Zainab, you left Women for Women. So tell us answer the question.
I mean, here's how I would answer it, because here's the thing about life. It's ups and downs, right, and zigzagging. The ups are high and in adrenaline, and you're excited and all of these things. Eventually, I decided that my measurements has to be on the low moments. Am I okay in the low moments? You know, because the high is just delicious, it's fantastic, you know, we don't need to talk about that, you know. But, and we brag about that on social media and all of these things. So if you see other people curating their lives, you only see the highs, right? You don't see the low moments. When you're alone, you know, in whatever happening in your life, whether it's health issues or family issues and all of these things. And I decided that I'm gonna measure myself in the low moment. And in the low moment, you have to understand who you are. And here's the best tip I can give you is you're gonna have to confront that question of who you are, whether you're in your 20s or 90s. It's gonna hit you. So I always say be preemptive about it and start your life with the foundation of understanding and taking the time of understanding who you are, what is your value, what are your values, what kind of life do you wanna lead, and base it on that, because after that, it's a zigzag. You know, after that, sometimes you succeed and sometimes you fail. And so for me, it didn't become about success or fail. It became about the courage. Am I courageous enough to live my life? And I really, this is one thing I do give myself is I am courageous, right? And in my courage, I succeeded. And in my courage, I failed. But I gave it the shot. And so my measurement is if I die today, I don't want to tell God, please, God, just give me one more year so I can fix everything. You know, I want to be able to say, you know, I really tried everything. I gave it all of me, whether I am 50, I just turned 50, or whether I am 20. I gave it all of me, that I'm living life, all of it. So then the zigzagging of life, the highs is high, and the lows, it becomes measurements. Okay, I may not have succeeded in this, but did I try? Did I give it my fullness? Did I really, you know, gave it my best? Yes or no? And then you move on from there. So that has become, that's how I measure it. I don't know if I answered the question.
Well, you know, there's a few things to consider in response to this, and I think where I am age-wise, career-wise, and my son's only 4 years old, so I hopefully he's not keeping score yet. But I would like to think if he is, he's actually quite happy with how things are going. But we'll find out soon. But nonetheless, I think, you know, when you think about, well, let's think specifically about what Zainab was saying about kind of know yourself and how important that is. And I'll give you one just short personal anecdote that I think illustrates kind of how it's okay at times if your trajectory in life changes, and if it changes dramatically, and that's all right. So I'm gonna hail all the way back to when I was 5 years old. And it sounds funny to start that early. However, I was 5, and my father, whose name is also Howard Buffett, was running for public office. This is in Omaha, Nebraska. He is running to be Douglas County Commissioner. And I could not have been more excited about the fact that my dad was running for office. Not only was I 5, but because we had the same name, I thought I was the one running for office, right? So like it was a very salient moment. And you know, I would dress up in my pajamas and cover myself and vote Howard Buffett buttons. And they would take me to the fundraisers, and they send me in ahead of time, and I'd go shake hands and everything. You know, I mean, it was the kind of idyllic thing you could do as a 5-year-old boy. And of course, my dad was my hero at that point. And I still remember the night when he won his election, and really kind of the lessons that he imparted in really taking, quite frankly, a thankless public servant job. Being a county commissioner in Douglas County, Nebraska is nothing kind of really starstruck about doing that. But in doing so, he really devoted his life during that time to improving our local community the best he could. And he and my grandmother, rest her soul, would always remind us as young kids that for those who are, you know, given great opportunities in life to go out and make the world a better place, you have the responsibility to do that as well. And so as I was growing up, I always presumed that for whatever reason, public office would be the right kind of route for me to go out and enact change in my life. But as I grew older, as I got into grad school, and I said earlier, I kind of realized, yes, I want to eliminate all human suffering, right, with this kind of this easily accomplishable goal. I also thought more about what kind of vehicle or avenue I could employ in order to do that. And when I had finished my time at the White House and finished doing my work at the Defense Department, I made a very conscious decision actually to not run for office. My wife and I had moved back to Omaha and we were considering it, but we made a different series of life choices. And since that time, and maybe instead of trying to become an inspirational leader, not to say that I am in any way, but that I would focus on the folks who I thought would be, again, that next generation of inspirational leaders and really touch as many classrooms and as many students as I could with the lessons that I had been so blessed to learn through my life and to really impart that. So I think that the observation here is when I went through that transition of realizing I probably didn't want to run for public office, but I wanted to invest my time elsewhere, that was a tough thing to come to in terms of identity. And as Zainab was saying, knowing yourself, knowing what drives you, knowing what your values are, it's about the only thing that can get you through a really significant shift like that. But also be open to the fact it could be one of the best things that happens in your life. And I couldn't be happier right now that as a 36-year-old, I can devote so much of my time with my family, my son, and really doing the work that I find so enjoyable with my students and everyone else. And I think it would be harder to do if I were out there running for office right now. So hopefully it's an interesting lesson that I can impart.
Thank you. We're out of time. I wanted to say just a couple of things, though. I thought about all this a lot, as you might imagine. I mean, I've had 2 whole lives. I've now been out of the White House more than twice as long as I was in it. And I'm very grateful for the life I've had and did with since then and the work I've done, including having all of you in these chairs. But I think that if you're high-minded and earnest and good, you also have to have some tricks to get over yourself. I do still. I mean, I think developing a discipline of gratitude and understanding in a way that there's no such thing as the king or the queen of the world enables you to do more, not less. So when I get in a funk, I try to think of really big things and really little things. For example, I devoted a lot of time when I was president to investing in science and technology. We sequenced the human genome. We revitalized the space program. I put GPS in the public arena over the opposition of the Defense Department. What would we do without it now, right? Maybe we'd stay home and be happy, I don't know. But the point is, so I think about this. So, and it doesn't make me feel small to be small. It makes me feel big that I have a brain and we have, the one thing the human species has, as the great microbiologist E.O. Wilson points out, is consciousness and a conscience. But you have to still try to keep it in perspective. So when I get worried, I try to think of something really big and something really small. Really small is the human genome, right? So we're all 99.5% plus the same. And you can see that in every non-age-related difference you can see in this crowd is rooted in half of 1% of your genome. Now, that's a big number because there's 3.6 billion of them or something in you, but still, it's 0.5%. Most people spend their whole lives spending 99.5% of their time focused on that 0.5%. Now, the 0.5% is important. It makes you interesting. It makes you powerful. It takes you in different ways. But you will, all the things you just heard them say for an hour, basically is they use their 0.5% to maximum benefit when they were focused on the 99.5% in every person they saw. The other thing I think about is I really got interested in physics, both particle physics. We found the Higgs boson, the God particle, which answered the question of how can, for example, protons and electrons and neutrons lead to a balanced atom. If it's all balanced, how can growth occur? And we just found that out. And we're on a planet that's now been carbon dated to about almost 4 billion years old. And our species has been around, give or take, a couple 100,000 years when the first humans rose up on the East African savanna. So I think about big things now in the sky. Think about this. There are 1 billion galaxies, not planets, galaxies, like ours, the Milky Way, and the one you can see into Andromeda with a good telescope in the universe. And it's expanding. And here we are in what has affectionately been called the third rock from the sun, acting every day as if whatever it is that's eating us alive or driving us is the biggest thing in the world. Recently, we saw the first photo from space of a black hole in the universe. Remember the picture? The fiery rim around the black hole? It was 55 million light years away. And I read a scientist wrote an article about it. He said, to give you an idea of the energy in the black hole, if our entire solar system, not the Earth, our entire solar system went by that hole close enough, it would suck it in, crush it instantaneously, and the entire matter left from our solar system would fit in a thimble. So if you've been president, it's not so important who's on Mount Rushmore, is it? The only thing you have that no one can take from you, no one can make bigger or smaller than it is unless you give them permission, is your mind and your heart. Nelson Mandela told me that. I said, how'd you get over it? I mean, 27 years, you never got to see your kids grow up and destroyed your marriage. You're living with the consequences still of the years you missed in their lives. You get to be president for 5 years, then you get to go out and you live to be 95, but you missed a lot of the best years. How'd you get over it? Didn't you hate them all the way, really? He said, no, I hated them for 11 years. I kept alive for 11 years on my hatred. I'd been a boxer. I was fit. I was strong. I was breaking rocks. He said, then one day, I realized what they had taken from me. All these things, they could abuse me physically and emotionally. They could kill me. Nobody ever do anything to him if they killed Mandela in prison. All I had left was my mind and my heart. Those things I would have to give them. I decided not to give them away. So that's my advice. Decide what you want to do. Decide how you're going to keep score. Live with the transitions. When you're feeling really sorry for yourself, and I still, at 73, as fortunate as I've been, I still occasionally give myself a pity party. Get out of it. Just remember, if you got your mind and your heart, you're a free human being. Even if you're in prison, you're a free human being. And be grateful. Let's give them a big hand. Thank you.